Hello and welcome to the lecture on creating Google homepage. So this is more of an exercise and I want you to try this out. And I'm going to talk about some of the responsive design here. So let's open this page. Okay, so this is how the page looks like. It has some links here with a button. Then you have an image, then you have this text box, then you have two buttons, and then you have your footer. All right. So this is a classic example of how to work through an HTML and CSS and create something that you found on the internet. Okay, let's review the code. So for this we are using Google Fonts, okay, Roboto, and then we have the style.css. So you have the style.css where the styles has been created. Okay, on this HTML page you have header, you have some div tags, right? You have buttons, and then you have your footer. So you have your Google image, then you have form search, then you have these buttons, then you have the footer. Okay, at the header you have this navigation link, Gmail, images, and sign in. That's basically the coming up from here, these three. Then at the image you have this image, right? This image is phptraining.jpg, which you can find it here. Okay, I'm adding the height and the width to it, that's why it's in this size. Then you have your form. Form is nothing but just a simple text form, right? This is nothing but the simple form. Then you have your buttons, right? You have your Google search, and I'm feeling lucky, 2 buttons, nothing fancy about it. Then you have your footer, that's basically the links here. You have your UL, and then which is floating left and floating right, 2 links floating left and 3 links floating left, 3 links floating right. And then you have your simple analyze to it, where you have removed all the list and everything. All right, so a very simple and easy to understand form, right? Nothing fancy in this web page, but if you look at it and how to apply this, the most of the magic is happening from CSS. HTML is just printing all the tags together. You have your navigation coming up from here. Let's do a quick review. The image coming up from this image, right? That's the image. Then your text box coming up from that form. Then your buttons, these buttons are coming up from these buttons, right? Then you have your footer, that's nothing but this footer coming up from 2 different footing. One is floating left, one is floating right. All right, so let's review our CSS. So in the body section we have margin 0, padding 0, and the family is Roboto. So the text here that you see is Roboto font, and how it's able to get it, we have already embedded it in the from the Google Fonts. Okay, and header we have width of 100%, and then UL we have removed the styles. Navigation bar we have a float and it right, that navigation bar is the nav bar here. Okay, that's why it's floating on to the right side. If you float it to the left side, then they float onto the left side. Okay, but if you can float it right, then they float right. Okay, nothing fancy in it. Then nav bar, the li items, inline block, then you can have the padding. This link we just created a simple box. Okay, the box basically happening from the background color. If you remove the background color, you will not able to see it, but the text is available here. Okay, so that's the background color. Then you adding some margin, padding, and radius, and then you make the font as bold. Okay, then the navigation links, that's the links, right? The links that's basically coming up from navigation links is this, right? You are adding some color to it. And a tag, you're removing the underline, and on hover you are adding that underline. On hover, when you hover on the link, you are adding that underline, right? Then also you're adding a box shadow. You see there's some shadow coming up from here, you remove this. Refresh the page, there's no shadow here, right? You go on it, there's no shadow. It's very simple, just add some shadow and refresh your page, you can see some shadow here. Okay, I think nothing so fancy. If you don't understand these things, then it looks very complex, but actually one liner code, that's nothing but the shadow on hover. And what is this? This is pseudo class. We have discussed about pseudo classes and pseudo elements. This is pseudo class, right? Then you have sign in, that's the color. Then you have your Google area, which is nothing but Google and Google logo, that's this logo. And then you have align it to center, then you make it as a block, you margin 0 auto, make it center, you break it up from the actual flow. Then you have your padding top, that's the space, right? If you remove the space, the image will go up, right? So to bring it down, you're basically adding that padding, right? You're bringing it down with the padding on the top. So you're adding some padding here and then adding some padding on the bottom as well. That's why it's not sticking together. So if you remove this, the text box will stick to the image, right? So you are trying to add some space so that you have space between image and the text box. Okay, your form is align center. The form search here, the width is 450. So if you remove the width, you can see what happens to the text box. The width goes small. That's why reason you add the width, so that it goes big. Then you have your line height, and then you have your padding, and then you have form search. That's nothing but you're still adding some padding to it. That's the padding, that's the space that you're seeing it here. Then you have your buttons, right? You have two buttons here, right? You're aligning them to center, adding some padding on top, so that's why there's a space here, and some margin to the bottom. You see this, there's so much space here that's coming up from this margin, right? Or else it'll stick together, right? So you're really doing nothing here, right? It's just adding some spaces here and there, and then you are aligning the page, right? Then at the footer section, you are having a background border top. That's nothing but this line that you see is that line, right? And then the bottom one, you are removing the space. Then you have a width of 100%. That's why they are, you know, going all the way to left and right. Then at the UL, LI and UL and hover and footer right, these are all basically, you know, just making sure your text is having some space here on top. There's some space, and then, you know, when you hover onto the link, there's an underline there. All those, you know, very simple things that we have seen previously as well. Okay, I don't want to repeat myself by doing the same underline 100 times. So you already understood how to create an hover effect, on how to create a shadow effect, you know, how to add spaces in the bottom margin, left margin, top margin, how to move things top and bottom, and how to create a block, and how to change the height and the width of it. Okay, the interesting thing that you have to learn is the media queries. So let's look at the media queries now. So media queries is basically simple condition, the CSS you want to apply when the size of the web page changes. That's what the media query is all about, which is responsive in design. When you view the same web page from your mobile phone, your size of your web page will be different. When you view it from an iPad, the size of the web page will be different. And what the conditions are saying when it is viewed on the screen, and the max width is, you know, 565 px. So when that hit that size, let's say you hit that 565 size, you're trying to change some of the settings of the CSS, and that will be applied, and this has more precedence over the actual ones. And all the things I'm doing is I'm hiding that links. If you see it here, the links are here. When you go 565, we are hiding that links. And then look at the footer as well. Okay, the footer is like this. We are trying to add some gray color in the background, and then we are trying to put them, remove the float, make them in 1-2 lines instead of one line, and we are changing the width and all those things, right? So this is basically responsive in design. You can play around with it just to understand how the media query works. And then you can do many things. You can change the image when you're doing in a small, you want to reduce this image or make it bigger. Okay, you can play around with all these things. You can reduce the size of a text box if you are going down, right? You can hide the buttons. You see the buttons has been hidden here. So all these things you can play around with it just to show you how the media query works. You can have different impact on your web page when the size of the web pages changes, and that is handled by media queries. The condition is very simple. You say @media, and then you add your conditions. You can add many conditions. You can say if it's screen and the width. It's all about the width. So when you go full screen, what you want to do. When you go, you know, the browser screen, what you want to do. And if you want to have to know what is the screen width look like, go to inspect mode. Go to this one, this icon over here, which is toggle device toolbar, and you can change the width here. You can even go responsive of different phone sizes, iPad Pro and all those things. Okay, and you can tilt the orientation as well. That's the orientation. You can play around with it. But what's simple to understand about media queries is basically coming up from the conditions that you're putting on the media queries. You're putting a condition stating that when this size of this page goes to this level, I want to apply all this like display none to the buttons list, remove display none, remove the links and all those things. Okay, simple to understand. So play around with it, have fun with the responsive web design, and also create a Google homepage. Okay, so that's all for this lecture on creating a Google homepage, and I'll see you in the next one.